I want to take you back in time to August 1768, and we're in the little town of Plymouth on the south coast of England. The gentleman that we're going to discuss today is Captain James Cook. He was born in Yorkshire, England, which was only about 50 miles or so from where I was born. James and his crew pulled up the anchor on their ship, the Endeavour. On board was 96 individuals, astronomers, artists, scientists, and for the next 5,000 miles they sailed the South Pacific. Captain Cook and his crew charted many small islands in the South Pacific. They then came across New Zealand and spent 6 months charting the New Zealand coast before resuming their voyage westward towards the open sea. After 1 year and 8 months at sea, they landed in a little place that we now know as Australia. The expedition continued northwards along the Australian coastline, with the crew coming ashore at 14 different locations. As they travelled northwards along the Australian coastline, they narrowly avoided a total shipwreck on the Great Barrier Reef. In October 1770, the badly damaged Endeavour came to the port in Batavia in the Dutch East Indies. Her crew was sworn to secrecy about the lands that they had discovered. In August 1770, Cook formally claimed the eastern coast of Australia for Great Britain, naming it New South Wales. The Endeavour was sold and was later named, wait for it, the Lord Sandwich. She was sunk in 1778. She was actually scuttled in Newport Harbour in Rhode Island during the American War of Independence. The British deliberately sank it as part of the blockade. The good news is the Australians built a replica of the Endeavour, and on this photograph you see her sailing out of Sydney Harbour. And just when you think it can't get any better, the wreck of the HMS Endeavour, which has been lost for over 250 years, has been discovered this month, June 2025, just off the coast of Rhode Island. Excellent news. Lorraine and I have decided Captain Cook is our hero, and we're going to follow his example by travelling north up the east coast of Australia. Wish us luck. After travelling north, we're going to come back down to Brisbane and rent a small camper and travel across the outback. We're anticipating it'll take us about 3.5 months. As we were travelling north along the Great Ocean Road, we came to a location called Lockard, and there was a story about the Carmichael family. I got intrigued by this story, and I'd like to tell you the story now. Let me inform you of what I learned about this ship, the Lockard, as we travelled down the Great Ocean Road. On board the Lockard there was 54 people. 37 of them were crew members. Of the 17 passengers, 8 of them belonged to the Carmichael family. After 13 long weeks of travelling, the ship was in the final 24 hours of arriving in Melbourne. On the final night there was real bad weather and a thick mist from the coast, and the ship drifted over 100 miles off course. When the mist finally cleared, the captain saw they were only 2 kilometres from the jagged cliffs at the edge. The captain tried very hard to avoid the cliffs, heading out to sea and dropping anchors, but it was of no use, at approximately 5 a.m. on Saturday, 1st of June 1878, there was a terrible crash. The Lockhart ran into the small island of Muttonbird, and the Lockhart sank within 15 minutes. First person to make it ashore was Thomas Pearce, who was the apprentice midshipman on board the Lockhart. He had been washed ashore, clinging on to an upside-down life raft. Eva Carmichael, dressed in her nightgown, was thrown into the water as the ship grounded. Unable to swim and totally exhausted, she was clinging to wreckage from the Lockhart. Thomas Pearce, who was standing on the shore, saw Eva out at sea and in trouble. He swam out to her and brought her back to the shore in safety. Thomas and Eva soon realized they were the only two individuals to survive. I could not contain myself. I was driven to find out what happened to Thomas and Eva in the years that followed. Here's what I was able to find out below. Thomas and Eva were helped and saved by the locals in the area, and there was a hope that there'd be a romantic reunion between the two of them. Thomas died at the age of 49. He had been a ship's captain for many years. He had survived at least one more shipwreck before retirement, but he lost his son Thomas in a shipwreck, and also his other son Robert was killed during the Second World War when his ship was torpedoed. Here's a couple of more photographs I found of Thomas, and if you look over to the far right hand side, you'll see the medal that he's wearing, that he was awarded for saving Eva. One of the locals, Mrs. Gibson, nursed Eva back to health. She was clearly mentally and physically exhausted. The bodies of her elder sister and her mother were eventually found and buried on the 5th of June on the top of the cliff. Eva returned to Ireland, and some years later she married a wealthy man. She lived a long and prosperous life, though she remained haunted by the memories of the wreck that took all her family. Of the 52 people who died when the Lockhart sank, only 4 bodies were ever recovered. Those of Mrs. Rebecca Carmichael, her daughter Miss Raby Carmichael, Arthur Mitchell, and Reginald Jones. They were all placed in coffins from the timber washed ashore from the Lockhart and buried in the cemetery. Much of the cargo of the Lockhart was swept away into the gorge. One of the most unlikely pieces of cargo to have survived the wreckage was this Minton porcelain peacock, which is only one of 9 in the world. The watch was found in the waistband of Eva Carmichael's elder sister Rebecca, whose body was one of the 4 that were recovered and buried after the shipwreck. I went to the cemetery and eventually found the gravestone for the Carmichael family, and I paid my respects. My next tragic history lesson is regarding Captain Robert Falcon Scott and his team of 5 as they raced to the South Pole in Antarctica. When Scott started his adventure to get to the South Pole, he arrived in New Zealand with his wife Kathleen. They spent 2 weeks together before he boarded the SS Discovery and headed to Antarctica. Robert Scott was 13 years old when he joined the Navy as a cadet. and by the time he had reached 30, he was Captain Scott, and he volunteered to take the first Antarctic command on the HMS Discovery, leading to Britain's first major scientific expedition to Antarctica. The HMS Discovery was the first vessel designed specifically for Antarctic research. She was dual-purpose. She featured sail and a steam engine, allowing her to navigate both in open waters and thick ice. She was built to withstand being trapped in the ice, and she was considered the strongest wooden ship that was ever built at that time. Scott, driven by his desire to be the first to reach the South Pole for the British Empire, achieved his goal on January the 17th, 1912, only to discover that Edmondson had arrived 1 month earlier. They had trekked for 81 days and covered a total of 800 miles. You can imagine their disappointment and despair. Petty Officer Edgar Evans was the first member of Scott's team to die. He was suffering from physical exhaustion and total exposure. Edgar died at the foot of Piedmont Glacier. His body was never found. 28 days after Evans had passed away, Titus Oates walked from his tent into a freezing blizzard. His death occurred on the 32nd birthday. It was an act of self-sacrifice. 3 other men were eventually trapped in their tent by a blizzard that raged for 9 days. They died from starvation when they were only 11 miles from their food bank. Though suffering from exhaustion and starvation and close to death, Captain Scott continued to write in his diary. The next slide is 2 of the last pieces he ever wrote. Unfortunately for Scott and his 4 colleagues, on the 850-mile return journey, they all met a tragic end. A hero's end. Captain Scott writes, "He was a brave soul. He silent through the night, hoping not to wake, but woke in the morning, and it was blowing a blizzard. Oates said, 'I'm just going outside, and I may be some time.' He went out into the blizzard, and we have not seen him since." Captain Oates realized that he could not march no more, and that his comrades would not willingly leave him. By going out to meet his death, he left them free to push on and take the chance of life that remained to them. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. The last message of Robert Scott. We arrived within 11 miles of our old one-ton camp, with fuel for 1 hot meal and food for 2 days. For 4 days we have been unable to leave the tent. The gale is howling about us. We are weak. Writing is difficult, but for my own sake, I do not regret this journey, which has shown that an Englishman can endure hardship, help one another, and meet death with as great a fortitude as ever in the past. We took risks. We knew we took them. Things have gone against us, and therefore we have no cause for complaint. But bow out to the will of Providence, determined still to do our best to the last. Had we lived, I should have had a tale to tell of the hardship, endurance and courage of my companions. which would have stirred the hearts of every Englishman. These rough notes and our dead bodies must tell the tale. R. Scott, 25th of March, 1912. Captain Scott's diaries are the compelling, tragic first-hand accounts of his expedition to the South Pole. They detail all the scientific discoveries and the eventual demise of his party. This is the penultimate slide in my presentation. The photograph on the right is of Robert Scott, and if you want to see it, it stands in Christchurch, New Zealand. The photograph on the left is Edward Wilson, and if you want to see Edward, you have to go to Cheltenham in England. What have these two statues got in common? Well, they were both designed and sculpted by a lady called Kathleen Scott. Yes, Kathleen Scott is the wife of Robert Scott, and the medal that you see in the middle now was what she received, awarded posthumously for Captain Scott's achievement in the South Pole. I thought I would end Captain Scott's history with what the South Pole looks like today. The end. We really hope you've enjoyed watching this as much as we have enjoyed the last 14 years of travelling the world. Travelling, the only way to live.